Welcome back to the Why Mindset Matters podcast. I'm Eslana Loa. I'm an author, speaker, resilience mindset coach. I'm a nurse, a midwife, and a mother of four. And if this is somehow the first episode of mine that you've found, I do want to provide a content warning. I do discuss suicide and the loss of my teenage daughter, Riley. In today's episode, I want to talk about something that's been sitting heavy on my heart. And that's the way that we've started kind of censoring grief and loss, and especially conversations around suicide. Because somewhere along the line, political correctness kind of crept into the most human parts of our experience, and suddenly those of us in the arena are the ones who are actually living through it, are being told how we're allowed to speak about our pain. And it feels irritating is a nice way of saying it, anger inducing at times, but I want to share my thoughts on how phrases like committed suicide or trigger warning have now become apparently taboo, and how this kind of policing the way that we talk. I know that, and I can see that it can come from people trying to protect or do good or minimize harm, but instead what's happening or likely to happen is it's going to silence people whose voice needs to be heard. And for me in particular, grief is raw. I would say it probably is for most people. Grief is raw, it's real, and it doesn't follow a script. And when I in particular have to pause to choose the right words, it kind of disconnects me from my authenticity and the truth that I'm trying to share. And the whole reason I'm here, finding my voice and sharing my experience. And so I want to use this episode as an invitation to have real, uncomfortable conversations, not polished ones, because when we censor how we speak about pain, we also censor the capacity we have for the very healing that could come from it. And I am a big advocate for bringing conversations around the darkness into the light, having real, raw, unfiltered, unscripted conversations about all of it, because I know that's where my power lies. I know that the capacity that I have to show up the way that I do saves lives. It does. And that's not me. That's not my ego. I, if anything, kind of struggled a bit with that realization, because I sit alone in my studio and I record this podcast and then I self-edit. And then I put it on a hosting platform that sends it to it's listened to in over 22 countries all over the world by thousands of people. But I do my bit alone and then it's out there. And so it's easy to kind of forget, for me, the potential for such a broad impact that my voice has and the platforms that I use for it. But I have been inundated of late, between the podcast and my book now being out globally, available on Amazon and read by people, and the feedback that I'm getting that you saved my life, and stories about where they're at in their grief or how they were struggling with their illness or their diagnosis or whatever it is, and the ability for me to show up so authentically, which is my realness, rawness, and my capacity to do so not filtered or scripted, is my superpower that creates or facilitates connection, where they're finding their way back to tell me about how it's impacted their life. And at an individual level, the policing how we talk about particularly suicide is difficult for me, because it's made me this last week feel sick with nerves about what's the right thing to say. And because I have such a big heart, a powerful message, and no malicious intent, and not much capacity to think before I speak, I can be misinterpreted at times, but it's never my intention. And so I'm usually so careful as it is to be thoughtful as I speak, because it's not scripted or pre-thought out. But this censorship that I'm experiencing has made me feel the weight of having to pause and try and think before I speak in an otherwise authentic interaction, where the power in it truly lies in the authenticity and the capacity to be vulnerable, and seeing our vulnerability as strength, not weakness, and the ability that I have to share the lived experience that I am currently living through in an unfiltered way that validates people's lived experience. because I believe that we lose as many people as we do to suicide because a lot of them suffer in silence and then they self-isolate. And I think the self-isolation is the beginning of our destruction because we unravel ourselves, and I'm speaking from experience here. And I don't think it's a matter of misery loves company. I believe that it is a matter of misery needs company. When you're in that darkness and you might have your hand on the doorknob of life ready to exit this life with a narrative that facilitates an ease with which you could do that because you believe that people would be better off if you weren't here, or this is the only way out of my pain, or whatever the narrative is that has been adopted in that darkness. I think that the capacity for somebody who has sat there to help you understand that if you just called out, if anybody else is here, can you just turn the fucking light on? Somebody would turn the light on and you would realize that you are far from alone in your suffering, that misery needs company. It needs the good company of people who are going to lift your head above water when you were convinced that you were otherwise going to drown. And as I've spoken and my grief journey has unfolded and I found my voice, whether it's podcast, a book, in personal interactions, what I find when I talk about this stuff is everyone I speak to has either been in the darkness, they're in the darkness, or they've lost someone to the darkness. And so I believe that the best and biggest way that we have the capacity to combat these statistics is by bringing conversations around the darkness into the light so that we can validate each other's lived experience, not in a way of misery loves company, in a way of misery needs company, in order to see that I might have convinced myself that this is the only way out, but then I can have this shared experience with people who've sat there and they've found their way, another way out. And that is to live in a way that may mean living and grieving simultaneously, but it definitely means more than just surviving. There's somebody standing here who's saying that they've been in that darkness, but they're thriving in spite of their grief or loss or challenges. And so I know from all the messages that I'm getting back, the power of speaking openly, honestly, raw, in such a raw and, I'll keep saying it, unfiltered and unscripted way that facilitates a connection through authenticity and vulnerability. Not needing to have polished conversations, being willing to have difficult ones, being willing to ask difficult questions or ones that are deemed to be a bit taboo. I'm in a Facebook group with Connecting Mothers in Grief, and it's all women who've lost children, maybe as early as in pregnancy or post-birth, all the way through to adulthood, but from a variety of reasons. And I went for a walk with a couple of women, and one of them has only recently lost a son. And I asked her, how did he die? And she kind of paused and looked at me. And I remember her just being a bit shocked that I was game enough to ask, because she said, people don't ask me. And maybe there's some people that don't want to be asked or think that that's offensive, but when you have a big heart and a well-intended message and no malicious intent, then there isn't really anything you can't discuss. I remember saying, and I would explain to anybody when I asked this, is I had explained to my daughter's friends after we lost Riley that came over for a birthday party and a sleepover. I said, I think you girls are aware we lost their sister to suicide. If any of you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. The girls aren't up to that, but it's natural to have questions. It's how we as human beings make sense out of our world. There's nothing I won't talk about. Obviously, I was willing to do it in an age-appropriate manner, but I wanted them to know that they weren't wrong or bad for wanting to make sense out of it, for wanting to maybe know how she died or what had happened, because just like me asking this particular person or anyone that I would ask, I'm asking how he died so that I can better understand your grief, your lived experience, and the complexities that come with losing a child in that manner. Because the reality is a prolongation of death via an illness or disease, it brings so many complexities that need consideration, and there are ways that can compound the grief. Losing somebody suddenly and without warning brings its own complexities. There is so many, losing someone at the hands of somebody else. Like, it's just, there's so many ways and reasons why me asking you more about your grief and your journey and your lived experience is the last thing that should be offensive. If the intention behind it is to seek a deeper understanding of you as a person, your grief and your lived experience, so that I can facilitate connection and have a more meaningful interaction, but also just let you be heard and seen and feel valued in that, then how and why the fuck have we made things like that taboo? And how am I the weird one or the one who's in the wrong? And so it doesn't bother me. Things like that don't, because I can follow it up with a conversation of like how I've just explained it, even if the person seemed offended. And the other woman there, we kind of had a conversation about how some people do find it offensive for you to ask. And I explained that the way that I see my daughter's death and my loss is that Riley will forever be a massive part of our journey and my story. And she's such a significant part of my story. And her death is an exclamation mark in it. But what it won't do is define my story or my journey or my daughter's. And so when I talk, even if somebody didn't know me and initially their instinct was to be offended or feel triggered or however you want to explain it, then it's very hard to stay in that place because of the authenticity, vulnerability, and the realness with which I will follow up any questions or any perception of offense, because there is no malicious intent. And so I was preparing for this event that I've got coming up. And if you are listening to my podcast, if you're on my social media, if you are we're in each other's lives in any form, it would be very difficult for you not to know about the upcoming celebration of life. And that is a fundraising event that I've got on the 29th of November on the Gold Coast. And when I lost Riley, we had a celebration of life. And it made me realize that when we do lose someone, we have this celebration of life where the intention is to translate and transmute all this love and appreciation we have for the person. But the reality is they're gone. And it got me thinking, why don't we do more of this while people are still here? Give them their flowers while they're still here to smell them. And so we're having this event, which is intended to do that. And it's going to be an annual event where the intention is to use the fact that somebody pops into your mind as a prompt or to pause, pick up your phone, call them, message them, leave a voice message, but tell them how much they mean to you, how much you love them, how much you appreciate how they show up in life, whatever it is. Because you have no idea how many people that would actually serve to be a conversation or a message that lifts their head above water when they were convinced that they were otherwise going to drown. And so we're having this event. This is a beautiful event, and I needed to get the word out there. And I had a videographer coming to do a clip that I could use to promote the event. And he said to me, have a think about how you can just grab people's attention at the beginning of the video. And I was like, you know what? I got just the guy. And Tommy Armour is an influencer that you might have seen or heard of who lives on the Gold Coast. And he's a beautiful man who had offered to help promote the event. He chomps raw eggs and swallows them and eats raw onions like they're apples and does all this silly shit online. And I had said to him, will you come and help with this video? And he did. And we did the first take of the fun one, the skit. And just was perfectly imperfect. We didn't need to try and script it or filter it or anything. It was just real and us and silly, and we did it. And then I wanted to do a video where I actually spoke more seriously about the statistics and the intention behind this event. And I started talking, and I was trying to get it right. I was trying to do it for the camera, I guess, or for political correctness, or to be more palatable. I don't know. I don't actually know, because it felt uncomfortable. And I stopped way through, and I was like, I'm so sorry. Can we start again? And the videographer and Tommy were like, wait, what? That was great. That was amazing. You had me. Like, I was hooked listening to you talk about it. And I said, it's just not the way that I talk about it. I have this conversation every day nearly. Like, I just want to say it the way I say it. So I started again, and I spoke about how before I lost Riley, I had no idea that 9 people every day take their life in this country, and 6 of them are men. And that's just those that succeed. It doesn't take into consideration the significant number of people who harm themselves, and it doesn't result in their death. And so as somebody who has worked in the healthcare industry for 20 years, I've been an emergency nurse, ICU nurse, and when somebody attempts suicide, we see it. If they don't die at the time, they come to the hospital or they end up in ICU, and we care for them. Fortunately for the greater population, our media does a lot to police not letting the true impact of suicide on our culture and society be portrayed in the media. Like, a lot of deaths are kept from the media because we don't want to be seen to be encouraging it. We don't want to be normalizing it. And that's a positive thing. But what happens is the general public don't really get the gravity of what a big impact this is having and how many people are suffering. And so I was trying to make that point. I was trying to make that point. And when I posted it, so I did it, I said it the way I would say it, and it felt great, and we put it out into the world. And somebody commented saying, love the intention behind the event, positive, all that, but then in quite what felt like an abrasive and controlling manner, tried to police the way that I had spoken and said that I need to not say success or succeeded when talking about suicide. And I honestly don't know how you're supposed to explain what I was trying to explain. There is a whole lot of people who try and harm themselves or may intend to die and don't, since I'm not allowed to say succeed, and end up in hospital or ICU. And the statistics that we find shocking to hear, that 9 people every day take their life, don't even consider that. So I'm trying to make the point that there are so many people hurting. There are so many people that could do with that conversation where you tell them how much you fucking love them, how much they mean to you, how valuable they are in this life, because there is a whole fuck ton of people who are suffering in silence, isolating themselves, and the self-isolation is what unravels us, because then we convince ourselves further that no one would understand my suffering and that I'm alone in this. And the reality is we're far from alone. And as I've said before, when I've had these conversations with people, every single person has said, yep, I've been in the darkness, or I'm in the darkness, or I've lost someone to the darkness. That's been all of my conversations. So if that is the case, then mental health, our well-being, our capacity to do better as a population, as a society, and as a culture, and globally, is that we really could be doing better. We could be doing more to let people know how much they mean to us, to validate their lived experience, to turn the light on for them, to be willing to have raw and real and unfiltered and unscripted conversations around the darkness, where we bring those conversations into the light, validate your lived experience, put your head above water when you're convinced you're going to drown, but also show you that there is no shortage of people who are willing, able, equipped, trained, ready to love and support you and wrap their arms around you in your time of need. They just need to know that you're in a time of need. And how do we get people having those conversations? I tell you how we don't. Not by policing the way people like I talk about it. Not by saying that I did it wrong because I said that then they're just the ones that succeed. And so what's come since that comment on my social media is an awareness of an initiative that is well intended, but that said the do's and don'ts of how to speak about suicide. And apparently, we are not to say committed suicide. We are to say died by suicide. I don't say either. I say she took her life. And you know what? She was my child. She took her life. She did commit suicide. She did also die by suicide. None of it is wrong. And the capacity to make somebody who has the strength to talk about this shit feel wrong for the way that they choose to speak about it, if the messaging is so fucking powerful and the feedback is that the message and the voice saves lives. It just blows my fucking mind. But apparently we're also not supposed to say trigger warning anymore. And on the 1st of June, I started this podcast, and I don't like the word triggered, because when people would say to me, they'd be talking to me about something, they go, oh, I hope that doesn't trigger you. I'm like, I think triggered means offended, and I'm not offended. There's nothing I won't talk about. There's nothing that you're not going to offend me. And so even though I feel that way about trigger warning or the word triggered, I still, out of respect for this generation, put the trigger warning at the beginning of my episodes, because I never wanted someone to find their way into an episode of my podcast without warning that I spoke about it and be negatively impacted by it. So I honored the good intentions behind this podcast and the listeners by providing a trigger warning at the beginning of every episode, even if the episode was about manifesting and I clearly wasn't going to talk about suicide. And apparently somebody needed to reinvent the wheel. And even though it's only November now, and this was in June, trigger warning is wrong. I'm now supposed to say content warning and say that this content discusses suicide. So it's a lot. It's a lot. If I'm honest, I've never felt triggered until this week. And it's not about a person, it's not about the initiative by the government that's trying to make a positive impact. There's good intentions behind changing the wording and being emotionally intelligent and self-aware. I will 100% acknowledge that. But by seeing the public comment on my post, and then what I'm seeing is a cultural shift that is underpinned by a desire, if not need, for political correctness in an arena that isn't politically correct. The way, in order for me to speak about the details of my daughter's death by suicide, there's no way for it to, I had it here, for the meaning of political correctness, using language and actions that avoid offending. Oh, mate, I don't know what offends people. I don't know what triggers people. I don't know how I could ever speak about the most horrific night of my life that other people can't even imagine experiencing. And so therefore they can't imagine surviving it, let alone thriving. And I hold space for and compassion and explain to people when they will ask me, how the fuck are you still standing? How are you? I wouldn't. And I explain that when something is unimaginable and incomprehensible and we can't even comprehend experiencing it, we definitely can't comprehend surviving it or then describing yourself as the happiest you've ever been. So if the greater population of 99, probably 0.9% of the population can't find it incomprehensible to even experience what I have, but then there's a group of them that decide that they get to censor how I fucking speak about it, it broke my fucking brain a little bit. And I have sat with anger. Not at anybody in particular. And I always look at my response to things as why, especially given where I'm at in my own personal journey and how the therapies that I've been doing has calmed my nervous system and I am thriving and I'm living in a peaceful state of being in my body. If something has incited this kind of stress response, what's going on here? Which part of this is about me? Can I get past this? And there's a bit of resistance in that I have been feeling a lot like, I get it. I get how our grandparents ended up so fucking old because they would have felt like the world was changing too fast and they just resented the change and they didn't want to be a part of it. So they just denied it and then became disconnected. And I've been very aware through my whole parenting journey that if I have that kind of, it's not intentionally arrogant, it's just hard. Being someone born in the 80s that grew up in a very different world to what is happening now, it is hard to see the rapid change and just be so accepting of all of it because some of it should be unacceptable. Apparently, there are people out there trying to encourage us to adopt the phrase minor attracted instead of pedophile. Like there's a lot of policing the wording around things that should be unacceptable. You shouldn't be able to say you're attracted to minors and you're not a pedophile. Like, do you know what I mean? So I'm very aware of how easy it would be to resist all of this change. And so I'm trying to be reflective on why is this affecting me so much? And don't get me wrong. It's affecting me so much because I'm in the fucking arena. I'm in an arena in life I didn't consent to being in, that nobody would want to be in, that should have destroyed me. And I feel like I have clawed my way out of hell just to get near the top, only to fall all the way back to the bottom and then claw my way out again and finally get out of hell to find myself surrounded by a group of people that have never been to hell telling me that I'm not allowed to talk about it like that. So this week has been a lot in that I'm just trying to balance the acceptance and compassion and empathy and understanding for the good intention behind where things like this stem from with what feels like an appropriate resistance, because there are things I will change. I can not do a trigger warning. I can do a content warning. I don't even say committed suicide. Oh, man. I won't say successful because that's made me sick with fucking nerves. But the reality is I just don't understand how that's what you hear. out of the message, out of the pain, out of the rawness and the healing that has taken for me to be here and not let everything that's happened to me turn me into an ugly, angry, homicidal mess. Instead, I'm sitting here in the midst of my healing, allowing the everlasting pain of my experience and existence to be a platform that validates people's lived experience and helps them heal and even survive and save lives. And so it's a lot. It's a lot. And it always is. Whatever topic I'm talking about, life is a lot. It doesn't stop being a lot. But I would encourage you to have the real and uncomfortable conversations, not the polished ones, because when we censor how we speak about pain and loss and suicide, then we censor the healing that could come from it. And it's a lot, but I think it's because we've reached this point where even grief has rules, and where the way we talk about loss and pain, and especially suicide, is so tightly censored in the name of political correctness, but it almost makes it like untouchable. It's almost like, even though we've got good intentions behind trying to censor, and that's what it is, the way that we talk about it, we make it feel more taboo to talk about it, because we don't really know what we're allowed to say anymore. And that's sad. I say Riley took her life, and I'm not wrong for saying that, and I'm not going to overanalyze the way that I speak about my own lived experience, that's for sure. Don't get me wrong. Like I said before, it's balancing it with the emotional intelligence that says, is part of this my responsibility? Could I be doing this better? But when I've had a professional videographer come out, make a well-intended clip that is raw and connects people and has great feedback, I'm not going to overanalyze that and get people back involved to re-record it in a politically correct way, because it's not. I'm not. It's not going to be politically correct, and my experience of suicide is not going to be politically correct. And I get it. I get, like I said, the intention behind the sensitivity, but when the people who aren't living this reality start dictating how those who are allowed to speak about it, it stops being about compassion and it starts being about control. And for me, this work, talking about grief, loss, mental health, and as part of it, suicide, is not about being polished. It's about being real. And my purpose here is to show up authentically, and that means a vulnerability that comes from being unfiltered and unscripted. And if I have to stop mid-sentence to think about the right terminology, then I lose the raw truth that might actually help someone feel less alone, if not save their life. And so I feel like it's a long overdue conversation, because the language of loss and the cost of censorship and why authenticity, even when it's messy or confronting, is exactly what the world needs more of. And it's quite sad when I realize that it's the censorship that might have started or stemmed from a well-intentioned place, but is being ultimately used, whether the person using it is aware of it or not, as a form of control. It makes people like myself reluctant to find or use their voice. And it did. It rocked me. It made me question my place in an arena that really I don't get to leave. So why am I questioning my place here? And grief doesn't need to be softened. It needs to be seen. And I am an advocate for bringing the conversations around the darkness into the light, because I believe that, if nothing else, my purpose or goal or whole point for being here in your journey, in anyone that finds me, this podcast, my book, is to shine a light in the darker areas and help you realize that just because you're in the darkness, it doesn't mean the light doesn't exist. If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this episode, though, it's that we can't hear what we're not willing to talk about. And I feel very passionately about having the conversations around the darkness, bringing them into the light, because if my purpose here, if you like, is to hold the torch and shine a light in the darkness and give people hope or validation or help them feel seen and worthy of a life that they love in spite of their suffering. No matter how much my hand shakes, I'm so willing to hold that torch. And then to have somebody outside of me, anybody, say that I'm not holding the torch right, or that I need to hold it in a way where my hand doesn't shake. And the reality is, I love how I'm showing up in life. I love the capacity that I realize that I have in spite of my grief, loss, and trauma to find my voice. And I realized in my early days of grief how you not just survive but thrive in this kind of grief and trauma is to find your passion and your purpose. And I've done that. And I got shook a little bit this last week by because my heart is so big and my intentions are so good and I care so much that it shook me. Like, I don't want to be less than effective. I don't want to be less effective than I can or should be. And I certainly don't want to be seen to be doing any part of anything that I'm doing in a way that is not serving others or puts people at risk of harm. Because I don't believe for a second that the way that I show up or that I talk about it is doing any of those things. And so, yeah, I'm happy to have the difficult conversations. I'm happy to show up authentically, and it's not always palatable for particularly not everybody, but for the right people, it is a welcome shot of tequila rather than trying to be everyone's cup of tea. And it is nice. It's a nice place to find myself as a human being, that instead of trying to be everyone's cup of tea, I recognize that I don't need to be anyone's. I need to be my own shot of tequila, own that shit, and then know that if I enter a room in life that doesn't serve me, I don't need to stay there. Because you enter enough rooms, you'll find the right rooms, you'll find your people, you'll find the ones that appreciate you for who you are, how you show up, and the impact that you make in being able to honor your authenticity and who you were destined to be in this life. And so, yeah, it's been a bump in the ride that shook me a little, but only because my intentions are pure. But it's messy, this human experience, but it's deeply real. And I believe that the deepest and most necessary connections that we can make or facilitate with others come from the capacity we all have to just show up in a world that says we need filters and perfection, but to do so perfectly imperfect without the filters or the scripting or any of it is one of the greatest gifts that you can give anyone in this life, is to work out who you are and show up as that version of yourself authentically and unapologetically. And that is my endeavor in everything that I do. Because when we try and silence people living through it because their truth doesn't sound comfortable for us to hear, we don't actually protect anyone. We just isolate them further. Even this experience made me think about, I looked at the ways that it incentivized isolating myself. It incentivized me being quiet because it doesn't feel good. It is not. It is definitely the road less traveled to work out who the fuck you are and then be that person authentically and unapologetically. It is a rocky path that is not a comfortable one at all. And so when you are in this already uncomfortable experience of vulnerability and authenticity, and then others are disgruntled at how uncomfortable it makes them to hear about your journey, it's just ironic. It's ironic. So I would encourage us as just the world to just let's stop trying to get the words perfect and start focusing on getting the message across, because we can make it okay to say hard things. Let's make it okay to ask uncomfortable questions and to tell the truth, even when it shakes the room a little, whatever room that is, because the truth is, every time we speak openly about grief or loss or mental health or suicide in this instance, we give someone else permission to breathe again. And sometimes you don't even realize that's what you're doing, but the capacity we have to have real, raw, and authentic but uncomfortable conversations is the very thing that you may find out down the track. You may never actually realize the power of your presence, but potentially saved someone's life without you realizing it. And so if we put more of an effort into endeavoring to, as an individual, on an individual level, work out who we are and show up authentically and unapologetically, because when you've got good intentions, a big heart, no malicious intent, then the rest is just noise. If we put as much effort into doing that, or teaching our younger population and our children how to do that, and I mean teach it by living it, then as much into that as we do into our endeavors towards political correctness, because look at the world. Even it's not just about suicide, it's about gender and identity and all of these things. We're so caught up in political correctness and getting butthurt over the way people say things, or reading into how they might have slipped up with their words, because that must mean they have malicious intent. There's so much effort going into this side of things that if we put a portion of that effort into showing up authentically and teaching our younger people and our children how to do that, I believe that we would be facilitating more of our basic human need for connection that has probably been lost to the advancements of technology and social media and the need for perfection and filters and being able to do 1,000 takes to put the perfect one online. Let's get back to the basics. I believe that if we did that, we would see significant decrease in the losses that we're experiencing, a significant improvement in people's well-being, mental health and well-being, and keep a lot more of these incredibly valuable humans in this life with us. That would be my hope for this life, and that if anything that I can do or say, or any platform that I can use facilitates that, then I would die happy, because that's all I'm trying to do. So it made me a little bit sad to think that I would ever be misconstrued as anything but pure in my intentions, because the truth is, every time we speak openly about grief and loss, mental health, like I said, gives someone else permission to breathe again, and we could all do with more of that. So thank you for being here, for listening, and for holding space for these conversations that I believe truly matter. And if this episode resonated with you, then please share it. Not for numbers, but because someone you know might really need to hear it today. And until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and remember, authenticity heals more than silence ever will. I'll see you in the next episode.